Names are an interesting facet of human society. We create these labels out of thin air with no real rules or guidelines. This forces the namer to completely rely on his or her own imagination, thoughts, or feelings. I find this interesting because I believe a made-up name tells quite a lot about a person via their thought process. Previously, we talked about Gorgeous George and his sock account Dolores Cummings. In this video, I want to cover another made-up character from Gigi, Dr. Vigoras, Vigorate, Semen. Dr. Vigoras is one of the characters George uses in segments of his motel-filmed variety show. George also occasionally talks as this personality on phone calls. He describes the character as a German gyno and a wino, and has made statements such as these.
The gyno in me loves the titties.
No, man.
I love the titties because they go good down my mouth. And if I ever want to have some milk, I don't need to go to the grocery store. I just put the bowl of milk there and have some post toasties and have a little bit of milk. See, the thing is, then we just ejaculate in the mouth and then it's all good. So when we take the mouth
How
of...
homoerotic is the show? Is
When we... When we take the mouth of the little girl or the woman with the big bosoms, we ejaculate.
I like her already.
We ejaculate in her mouth, and she goes yum yum, and I say, "You call me here and my tum tum."
The character is meant to be funny and carry a comedy skit. In general, George uses the character to make overly sexual statements about the female anatomy in the guise of what he calls dark humor. So where did the name come from, and what does it mean? Why does the character have a middle name? How did George come up with two words that are clearly not a part of his typical diction? Let's look into it. Going in order, the first name we'll examine is Doctor. Now, of course, this is a formal noun and not a made-up name by Gigi, but important to analyze nonetheless. The title Doctor brings a lot of positive baggage with it for anyone carrying the title. Doctors are assumed to be well-educated, intelligent, important, successful, wealthy, and respected. Even a casual goon could take it from here. Those qualities are obviously antithetical to who George is and exactly what he has been fervently struggling to obtain in his adult life. When creating the character, George clearly and primarily drew inspiration from what he wished he was. The character is a way for him to pretend he has these qualities. Then, on to the first name. Vigoras, or sometimes pronounced Vigorius, is George's mispronunciation of the word vigorous, which describes a person who is strong, healthy, and full of energy. Vigorous comes from vigor, which means strength and health. A noteworthy distinction, this primarily refers to physical active strength, as opposed to mental or emotional health. This is important because it's clear that George prioritizes his physical strength over his mental strength. Once again, we're describing qualities that Gigi always tries to exemplify, but clearly these are qualities he does not possess. The desire for the unobtained, again, plays a consistent factor. The middle name Vigorate is a mispronunciation of invigorate, which, interestingly, is also derived from vigor, same as the first name. I find this egregious redundancy funny. It would be like if Gigi started going by Gorgeous, Beautiful George. Invigorate is a verb from vigor. It means to instill strength or vitality to. Essentially, it's the act of giving strength or inspiring strength in another. Another element I find interesting is that the words vigorous and invigorate are not found in typical Gigi language. Watching a George Rager or even a routine The Gorgeous George Show episode, you'll rarely hear a word from George with more than a few syllables. It doesn't seem likely that these words were conjured out of thin air by George, so where did he draw inspiration from? I'd love to hear any theories you all have. Here's mine. Through research, I discovered that invigorate is a marketing-friendly term you'll often find with male enhancement products. The term has a heavy masculine connotation, so brands lean on it to advertise their testosterone rebuilder. George has admitted he suffers from low testosterone, so I believe he would have seen this term on a male enhancement product he was shopping for and took inspiration from that. And of course, only having seen the word and not heard it may also explain why he mispronounces it. George's lack of testosterone will also play a role in this as a whole. More on that in a bit. And finally, we get to the last name, Semen. Well, it wouldn't be a Gorgeous George creation without a crude sexual reference, would it? George continues a long history of statements surrounding the male anatomy and bodily functions as he adds the noun to what is being invigorated. George's obsession with semen would take a video all on its own to explain, but we can sum up by saying this is something George is incredibly drawn to. Semen is something he wants to give, he wants to receive. Now that we know he has low T, it's also just something he wants to have. So let's put it all together. Dr. Vigoras, Vigorate, Semen. Or a respectable professional who is strong, giving strength to another in the form of semen. Now there are several reasonable interpretations. Let's review the primary ones. First, this name is a fantasy for George that he is a respectable professional who strengthens others with his semen. It certainly doesn't require a psychologist to see this is an immature vision of sex. It also speaks to George's simplistic view of sex, which he views as just the act of giving his semen to another person. Alternatively, one could also reasonably interpret George as the receiving end of this transaction. George has a long history of homosexual ideations, and again, analyzing his sexuality would be another video all on its own, but George has long had a fixation on male sexual function, as well as a deep-seated desire for approval from people he sees as superior. Gigi could be using this character as a fantasy about receiving vitality, which is something he desperately lacks, from the semen of a respected professional, aka superior. I do think the first interpretation is more fitting, but arguments can certainly be made that Dr. Vigorous Semen is a way for Gigi to fantasize about being invigorated by his superiors, so to say. So what do you think of Dr. Vigorous Vigorate Semen? And what do you think it says about George? Well, thanks for watching. Have a great day.